Good afternoon, everyone. We are thrilled to be presenting a timely program brought to you by the ABA Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice, entitled Effectively Using Publicity to Help Your Case. The panel is part of the latest Civil Rights and Social Justice Initiative, Civil Rights Lawyer Boot Camp, which is a two-day event, virtual seminar, that serves as a comprehensive resource for young lawyers, law students, public service attorneys, and advocates of all backgrounds. This is the third panel of the day, so we're thrilled that you all can join us. We have a fantastic set of panelists for you here today that are going to come today and inspire us on the very many things that they've been doing in their various programs. We hope that you will stick with us throughout the entire session. During today's program, we encourage you to ask questions of our panelists through the Q&A, not the chat function. If you do not see the controls, please ensure your screen is not idle. We will be monitoring the Q&A, and we'll do our best to address your questions, time permitting. We will share the recording of this program with everyone who has registered, so please share it widely with your networks and on your social media. We'll begin today with some introductions. So I will let our panelists start with the introductions. And Rabia, would you like to start?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Rabia Burks. I am the Vice President of Communications and Team Building at the National Legal Aid and Defender Association. I have a long history of doing communications work for various advocacy organizations, including FAM Foundation. I also have done communications for the American Bar Association, as well as its criminal justice section. So that's a broad overview of who I am and what I do. I'm also very active in a lot of PR related organizations like the National Association of Black Journalists, as well as the National Press Club and more. So I straddle two worlds, comms and legal.
Thank you. And next, how about Sue Ann?
Hey, good morning. Sue Ann Robinson. I'm the founder of Frontline Law, and I am also counsel for Ben Crump Law in the South Florida office.
And last but not least, Morgan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Valerie. I work with Converge Consulting. It's a social justice and philanthropy firm. My role is the Director of Communications and Marketing. My background is not in law or legal. However, I've found myself in a couple of different spaces and places where my work in PR and communications have fallen in that. In the past, I work with nonprofits, do live event production and qualitative research.
Great, thank you. I probably should introduce myself as well. My name is Mario Sullivan. I'm the chair-elect of Civil Rights and Social Justice. So we'll go ahead and get started off. And Rabia, the first question is for you. The media landscaping is always changing. Can you talk about the new avenues and pathways for people looking to elevate their voice and expertise in this climate?
Absolutely. So there's one big shift that's happened. Traditionally, a lot of times we turn to traditional news sources. So that would be like your CNNs, Fox News, your MSNBC, etc. And then also there's also your traditional print, such as, New York Times and other local news outlets that you have. But what has changed in the last, I would even say about 10 years, social media and the rise of influencers and the rise of podcasts and the rise of just this idea of credible messengers. And especially during times like this, where the media is very much overly saturated with what's happening nationally with the new current administration, a lot of times those traditional news outlets are chasing whatever's happening there. So sometimes it's very hard to get anything out. And so I think what is most important about the changing landscape is identifying people and places where you can share your message that gets directly to the audience. So for example, you can create your own platforms. There's a huge issue with the spread of misinformation and disinformation across every sector. And the average person has a hard time figuring out what is actually true and what is not true. And the truth is a lot of you all who are here today have those answers to the test, right? You all know what is actually true and what is actually false. And so being able to put out your own messages and being able to, especially around your cases and things that are happening, being able to use your own platforms and build those up, or support the platforms that already exist that you support, or then also those influencers, hitting them up and giving them talking points because they're not always right, you know. So there's a lot of different ways to get the word out, but I would love for everyone to start thinking more broadly than just your traditional, I want to write an op-ed, or I need to have a spot on CNN, which could be effective as well, but we all know that the landscape has changed tremendously.
Definitely. I know a lot of people are using the TikTok and making the videos there. So this question is both for Sue Ann and Rabia. In your experience, how does public perception influence the legal strategy in civil rights cases? And can you share your insights on managing media narratives to support legal objectives without compromising the integrity of the case? Why don't we start with Sue Ann?
Sure. Well, my kind of relationship with media in our cases is always that the media is, a sword and a shield. And you have to be extremely strategic in your messaging, extremely strategic in everything in order to use it as a shield and not harm the case in any way. Starting with just from the very beginning, just in my experience and how we kind of run cases from the beginning, is always, talk and communicate with the families, the most important part of the case. Because communicating with them and making sure that they understand that the media is a shield and a sword is important, because sometimes they're just trying to express themselves, get a message out, communicate. They've just been asked a question and they're just responding, not even taking into context the idea that, as Rabia said, the media landscape has changed. So just because they're responding to one comment under something on social media, it can completely go viral and take over the entire case. So my first step in every case is always to communicate the benefits and the harm of communicating with media, talking to media, and using media. And then, of course, coming up with a strategy that works for the family. So if some families are fine to be going through the process of grieving and also at the same time be in the media, some families cannot do that. And so we work with however the family is comfortable. And if they do decide that they're comfortable working with media and doing interviews, then we kind of have like our own internal boot camp, which isn't anything super formal, but it's just letting them know, hey, everything that you're saying, some things that you say can be taken out of context, to make sure that you're discussing, about your loved one, and keep your messaging on your loved one, and try not to get sucked in to any other questions or narratives that go outside of kind of what our strategic plan is for the messaging for the case. Because it's just, you never know. They could be saying something very casual, super simple about their loved one, and that could be, again, taken out of context. So it's always making sure that the family is on board with the way that we're presenting the case, making sure that, of course, we, as the lawyers, know and understand the family and the case, which when we're presenting also assists in how the messaging is received. Because on our cases, we always spend a lot of time with the families physically. So when we are discussing our cases, it's always, the messaging is always going to be authentic, because we are actually experiencing the events and what's happening alongside the families as well, while making sure that the actual facts of the case, and in cases where someone is deceased, that their memory and their legacy is being honored. But it's also about having a very sometimes direct communication with traditional and non-traditional media outlets. Hey, we don't want you to speak to the family without legal representation present. Hey, we don't want to discuss certain things. Let's limit the questions to X, Y, and Z. And sometimes if you're not kind of trained in that or understand that, you feel like, oh, well, whatever they ask, I need to just respond to whatever media is being asked. But the idea is, especially in this realm, is to understand that the media is a tool to help you to get out information about your case, and also to give a platform to whatever the issue is. And because of that, stay in control of what the messaging is and what your strategy is over the case. Don't give the strategy and the messaging to the media at large to make that decision.
Yep, very, very insightful.
I would just like to chime in and say, one of the other things about managing kind of public perception during a legal case is the idea that it's always broader implications, right? So if something may be happening in a city or a town, but usually if it's a civil rights related issue, there are questions of people are questioning morality, they're questioning legality of whatever has happened to somebody. There's a lot of discussion around what this means more broadly. And so a lot of what is being said about a case can sway how people go and vote, how people do all kinds of things, and how they get active. And so one of the things that I would just encourage everyone to do is to think through who else can share your messages, the broader messages. So if you can link up with advocacy groups who are working on issues that this case highlights, getting them to talk about those issues more broadly and generally, and what the implications are if the outcome is not favorable, they can kind of talk about that with the media and the press in a way that that kind of takes it away from families or your actual current case, if that makes sense, kind of elevate it. Also thinking through, being able to anticipate opposing narratives. So like whatever is being said by the opposition in any way, shape, or form, how do you get somebody out there to say something counter to that? Not in a sense of just influencing the case, but making sure that whatever the outcome is, the broader implications go into your favor in terms of winning the public narrative argument, if that makes sense, which is also always tied to these sorts of cases.
Thank you. Sue Ann, a question for you. As a legal analyst featured on platforms like Court TV and Fox News, how would you effectively utilize media appearances to advance civil rights cases? And what strategies have you found most successful in balancing legal proceedings with public advocacy?
In terms of my work as a legal analyst, I think that how I use that to enhance civil rights work is by discussing cases that are in my field. I think a lot of times, especially in a fast-paced moving media, it's easy for civil rights cases to get buried because they don't seem as exciting or they don't seem to have as long-reaching implications. But we all in the field, we know that they are the most important cases. So it's just making sure that those cases have a platform, making sure if I'm booked to analyze a certain case or a certain issue, making sure that I have the opportunity to tie in other issues and civil rights cases that I may or may not be working on that I think are important. And I think that the best way for that I kind of utilize and balance is, with our cases, a lot of times they are tried in the court of public opinion initially before anyone even hits a courtroom. So it's what Rabia said. It's like making sure that we have all our facts together, our side of the case for the court of public opinion, and also be prepared for any counter arguments. A lot of times in civil rights cases, specifically in police brutality cases, I'll use that specific example, there is multiple deaths of the decedent, we always say, whereas they're actually killed by the police agency, and then their reputation is then, attacked if they ever crossed the sidewalk wrong, if they ever did anything in their life. There's discussion about what their blood alcohol content was, all things that have nothing to do with the actual event that led to their death, but there's a counter narrative in anticipation of possible charges or what the public outrage or response is going to be to a specific case. And so we always work to have prepared to essentially break down in a very simple way to say, this is what led to our client's death. And that's fine that all of these things are being said, but one doesn't have anything to do with the other. To be prepared to, if there is a public kind of back and forth in terms of, well, this person, when they were in the 4th grade, they forgot to return a book to the library, that we're talking about all the books that they did return to the library, and that, they were an avid reader, and that they were, very involved in their family and their community and their church. It's being prepared to do those things. And in cases where, we're not involved in necessarily, but I mean, for the audience, when you're doing that, be prepared for that, and be prepared to have who and what the case is about ready for the court of public opinion, just like we would be expected to have what the case is about ready for actual court. Because as Rabia pointed out, and I know Morgan is going to point out too, the court of public opinion is very important, because a lot of times for civil rights cases, that's where support is going to come from. That's where we're going to garner outside actors, like government actors and other people that have influence in the case. So it's important to make sure that you have, who and or what the case is about already prepared, so that if you do have to counter any narratives in the court of public opinion, you're already anticipated that and ready to go.
Thank you. Morgan, so following the tragic loss of your family friend, A.J. Owens, how did you or the family engage the media to seek justice? And what advice would you offer to other families in similar situations on harnessing public publicity to support their legal battles?
So I'll kind of back up for folks who are not familiar with the case. June 2nd, 2023, Ajika Owens was shot and killed by her white neighbor through a locked metal door. Ajika was 35 at the time and a mother of 4. Her children were very, very young, all ranging at that time from about 11 to 3 years old. The company that I work for, Converge Consulting, does social justice work and philanthropy. And it just so happened that Ajika's best friend is the sister of the CEO of our firm, who moves money all the time, right? She gets the call and she says, okay, well, I'm coming down, partially in big sister mode, partially in her capacity in philanthropy and social justice. And so she sent a text message out to our group of friends, and 2 days later, I was on a plane to Florida. And so my job came in as the person who would handle media on behalf of the family, locally and nationally. When I arrived on the site, in Florida, we had just gotten an arrest. I think I maybe came 3 days afterwards. And actually, Attorney Crump is one of the main reasons why that happened, alongside Joy Reid. So for us, it was being able to build relationships and immediately get in contact with media on a national level, because locally in the state of Florida, in the Marion County in Ocala, Florida, where this happened, where the Stand Your Ground law was actually authored, there was no one who was on our side saying, this woman needs to be arrested, something needs to happen, as much as the family was crying out for help. We were actually told on Friday that we could call back on Monday to speak to someone because all of the investigators were out that weekend. So I think the biggest thing for us was making sure, especially on my end, with my background, not being in legal, not being in law, was having a really clear understanding of what the facts were, so that as we began talking to media, I was not putting out a press release that had not been seen by, our internal team, as well as the legal teams we were working with. Also an understanding this was a state's case. This was not a case where we were coming in and saying, we're going to be we've hired the law team that's coming in and helping. So having to kind of straddle the fence in some spaces and places to ensure that, while I wanted my headlines to scream out, they don't care about us, they're not helping us, we don't know if we can trust them, understanding that we had to let the law stand first, to allow for an arrest to happen, and also the investigation to continue before we start saying things. And so, listening to Sue Ann and Rabia speak, it was kind of just all of a sudden I started remembering everything that started happening from the day that I came onto this. And it was a daily thing with Ajika's mother, Pamela, who it sounds strange, but we're really lucky that she's one, so strong, but also an amazing speaker. And for her, that didn't come necessarily immediately. There was just so much pain at that time. But for what was really important for her was that her daughter's story was told and heard. And Attorney Crump, when you speak about being able to speak for the family, he was around and still is around, including the additional family folks that came on. Anthony Thomas, who actually came out of that office and is in Ocala, Florida, in Marion County. And so, we were able to get a lot of immediate attention kind of quickly, which then led to the arrest. Joy Reid broke the story nationally. The View has been an amazing partner. They've brought the family on quite a few times. Court TV has been really, really great to us. Melba has made sure that that story has been continued to be heard. We activated additional people that were in the space. So Tamika Mallory has been great. But there were also just other influencers and other organizations that we were able to tap into, with Takima working with in that space as well, and saying, hey, here's what happened. Here's what we know. Here's what we are. Here's what we would like to be. Here's what we are not saying. And this is what, we want you to be able to get out, creating toolkits, having, meetings a couple times a week with different people to share the story, and really giving as much access as we could without overbearing the family with too much. So, being able to say, okay, these are really, really important interviews. These are also important, but maybe just not right now. These are other angles we can take right now where we can continue to speak out while we're waiting for interviews. Because if I learned anything was, unfortunately, as we know, this is not something that was brand new. And this story is unfortunately probably going to happen again, right? And so the news cycle and how quickly it moves, we're a story today, we're not a story tomorrow. If something is happening that week and press can be on site with the camera, they are there. But the next week, that may not be their focus. So continuing those relationships, being able to answer questions as best I can, being sure that I invite people, being sure that I set up virtual press conferences for folks that could not come down to Florida. And just keeping up those relationships, I think, is the biggest thing. And being as open and honest as we possibly could while investigations continued, while we continue to fight to get to trial, which didn't happen until last August, and the sentencing and not until last November. And honestly, a lot of people don't have that, right? A lot of folks don't get to that point. And so being grateful for the media's participation locally, a lot of my phone number was available to anybody and everybody. Text me, call me, I'm available, because it was really important to us. So I think that's what I would share with folks.
Thank you. To all of our panelists, what ethical considerations should attorneys and families keep in mind when engaging the media in civil rights cases? Who would like to start?
I can. I think that it's important in civil rights cases to make sure that you have that strategy session that Morgan's talking about, so that the legal team, and if there's a separate comms team, and if you're fortunate enough to have a Tamika Mallory and Until Freedom and other grassroots organizations, to make sure that everyone is on the same page as to the messaging. I think the biggest threat to any type of media campaign in a civil rights case is if any one of those branches are not acting in concert, then the kind of miscommunication or lack of unity in the message can be construed as a problem with the actual case. So if you have a mom and you have a dad, and mom and dad are not together and they're not on the same page for the messaging, then there can be issues with that. Or if there's other family members, if there's an ex-husband, or if there's a child that's not involved with the family, but they are a family member and they're not on the same page with respect to the messaging. I think whenever I've had not necessarily ethical issues, but just issues in general, it's when everyone is not on the same page. That's why it's so important what Morgan was talking about, like with AJ's case, just meeting constantly and having constant conversation, because there is so much happening. There is so many different platforms that can be reaching out to different members of the family. And so if you're constantly meeting and communicating and saying, this is the messaging, this is how, everyone is kind of checking in, and this is how we're feeling today, so that if anyone is having an interview, we're all on the same page on who's attending the interview, what's being said in the interview, what the value of that particular platform is to the case in general. Everyone at all times really has to be on the same page. And in civil rights cases, and that's why I say, if you're fortunate to have, a lot of grassroots supports from other organizers, it doesn't all fall on comms or all fall on the attorneys or all fall on the family. It's kind of a unified group of people moving in one direction. But having a lot of moving pieces too can, as we all know, just from having, multiple family members, there can be miscommunication. So it's just so important for everybody to always be on the same page about what the overall strategy for the case is, what the overall goal of the messaging is. I know I have a lot of cases we do at the firm where we sometimes tag cases together. Like I remember during George Floyd case, Breonna Taylor's case was not getting a lot of attention at all. And working with Tamika Mallory and working with George Floyd's family, who was amazing, and saying, absolutely, we don't mind Breonna Taylor's family kind of coming along with us on our press runs, on our kind of media angles, so that Breonna Taylor's case could also get the attention that it needed for us to get it to where it eventually went. But that took communication with George Floyd's family, Breonna Taylor's family, for them to come together to say, okay, we don't mind. But there's some families that will say, no, I don't want to be joined with another family, or and a lot of times it's just whatever stage of grief they happen to be in too as well. So then you have to be mindful of that. But it's always making sure that everyone in the main circle is on the same page and communicating constantly, because everything does move very quickly. And you don't want, one kind of miscommunication or not being on the same page to cause an issue with the entire messaging of the case.
I can go. The only thing that I would add, I think, Suhan, I think you did an excellent job with that. The only thing that I would add is just ensuring that the messengers and everyone understands that what the stakes will be. So there will be trolls on the internet. There will be people who are reaching out, and they will be calling their jobs. There's all kinds of things that could happen when someone puts themselves as a face of an issue, or the face of their own cases. And just preparing all of those who are speaking, are going to speak out with about those things, just making sure they understand that's what's going to happen, and then finding ways to protect them from it in any way that you can. I think the coordinating of messaging, everybody saying similar things or from their perspectives, is great, but mainly it's just trying to find ways to protect those folks in as much as you can, and by also again preparing those advocacy groups or anybody else who can speak out. It doesn't have to be a big organization or anything like that, but whoever else is speaking out, to be able to step up. That way it could take some of the pressure off of those people who are going to be in the limelight and potentially just exposed to what I would deem as trolls, or anybody who is doing the more insidious work that we have seen across the internet.
Can I check,
Um,
Mario, or are we taking a question?
Well, we can definitely take some questions, but Morgan, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Sure. I was just going to say, I think in our case specifically, as I mentioned earlier, there are 4 young children that were involved. And so there were a lot of decisions made about how and when the children would be involved in any press media, wanting to be able to protect them. When we started off, there was nothing behind funding what we were trying to do to get off the ground at all. It was personal money that was put into this. And there were death threats and there was security that was needed. And, you have a 3-year-old baby boy and an 11-year-old boy. And, that was probably one of our biggest things. How do we get all that together? Knowing that everyone in the family was not necessarily aligned. And what that having a better understanding of what that meant for everyone involved before we started saying things to certain people. We have a documentary that will be coming out later this year, which has been a crazy part of the process and unexpected, but that has also been a part of it. A lot of the footage that happened from day one was not a part of the documentary, because the director decided, there's already so much out there. What can we do to protect the rest of the folks that are part of this? And actually, I'd say 90% of it is body cam footage to avoid necessarily putting more people into this story so that they can go home and feel safe at night when they're in their own homes. What it meant to move the family around multiple times to keep them safe in their community as well. So, and again, being sure that the things that we said were not only correct, but did not hurt our case by putting out a press release saying this is what we felt versus what actually happened before we went to trial.
And today's day and age, anybody can find anybody. So it's very difficult trying to keep those you want to keep out of the limelight and protected. But we have a few questions, and this one probably is more tailored towards Morgan, but this one from one of our attendees wants to know, how can social justice advocates who are not attorneys become more involved in this world?
So local organizations, again, folks that are, anything from we work with ACLU, we work with NAACP, we worked with Florida for All. There's lots of voter registration groups that are pushing for advocating for different things and laws that are coming out. I think starting local, what's happening in your city and then your state are opportunities. I think when things like this happen, folks immediately start reaching out to whoever's around and whoever has the capacity to help. So joining those organizations kind of puts you in a space and place where you can have a closer connection or direct line to those cases.
Can I add? I would also add there is an organization for practically everything. So if you are in whatever issue that you're feeling most passionate about, there is a local or a national organization that can be joined. They either need they have actions they want you to write your congressman or whatever it may be, all the way to grassroots protests and everything. So like I think it's more about figuring out which issues or which types of cases that you want to be more involved in, and then connecting with those organizations that exist. And there's literally one for everything. I can go on and on and on, but that do different things, grass tops, grassroots. I mean, just whatever you want, somebody does it, I'm pretty sure. And or you can start your own and become one of them. But for the most part, there's a huge spectrum of organizations that you could join to help push and promote civil rights cases.
Great, thank you. And a question from an attorney asking if you have any suggestions on having conversations and trying to get their administration and their legal service organization to be more receptive to using media.
What was the question? How to get them to be more receptive to using the media?
Yep. So any suggestions that you may have on having a conversation with their administration using the media contact?
Okay, I think that the idea is, sometimes if older organizations or people that don't really understand the benefits is to kind of show them, right? To kind of say, hey, this is a case where media was used and it helped, to kind of walk them through the fact that it could be used as a shield, it could be used as a sword. And sometimes people only think about the sword aspects, and kind of explaining, what the strategy would be if we did use media for XYZ. If it's for the organization in general, obviously you can share the benefits of that. But if it's for a specific matter, I definitely think that, there's enough cases now, especially with the way that Attorney Crump handles cases in the court of public opinion, to show the benefits of the media. But it's so important to in a conversation like that say, I am aware that there's negatives and anticipating those possible negative things that can happen, this is kind of what I would put in place. I can say that in a case that I work very closely on as a lead attorney, which was Shanquella Robinson's case, which was where she was murdered by six of her travel mates in Mexico. There was a tremendous, the case came from social media. The outpouring came from social media because the video of the incident was released on social media first. So it wasn't on the news first, it was on social media, and people on social media kind of raised the platform of that case by posting and reposting and sharing, etc. But because of that, it also, there was a lot of misinformation. Oh, these were her friends, she knew them, etc. And so there was a lot of time taken and a lot of care and intentionality on my part and our team's part to prepare our communications in order to address a lot of the misinformation that was put out, but also recognize, and ask for continued support from people. And I would say, when people ask me, you know, how do I get involved or how can I help? If you're not in an organization or you're not a lawyer or you're something like that, I think everyone, it's such important work that everyone can help from wherever they are. Like if you work at a hotel where an incident occurred and you know members of the family are, you know, don't have a place to stay, you can use, you know, your job to try to help in that way. If you can babysit for someone who you know is a part of an organization so that they can take that time to assist with the case in their organization, do that. But I always say, do whatever you can from where you are. Don't feel like you have to go and, you know, invent or start an organization or be out there on the front lines necessarily. If you cannot, you can do something from right, you know, where you are. If you own a catering business or you work at a restaurant, you can help with meals for people who are on the front line. So wherever you are, you know, do what you can from right where you are. Don't feel like you have to be doing something, you have to be a lawyer or you have to be marching on the front lines necessarily. I think we all, if we know what the goal is, we can all strategically do things from where we are to assist in the most important work of our time.
Very important. There's a few other questions in the Q&A. I don't know if anyone wants to address those, but I actually have a question here, the panelist. What would some tips that you would give to thinking about getting the media attention? And so if you have a case and you're wanting to get media attention, how do you get that attention? Should you get that attention? And how do you keep that motivation going with the case while it's progressing?
Sure. And Rabia obviously can chime in. I think the first step always is to kind of initially draft what you're wanting the media to know about your case. If it's just the existence of the case, whatever that is, you know, form your messaging first. If it's going to be formed in a press release, and then send that out. Once the press starts contacting you, the media starts contacting the family or trying to find more information on the case, the most important thing is to already have your story prepared. And don't feel the pressure because you are being contacted if you do not have your facts and your story together to respond. You can respond and say, we are going to release a statement tonight, tomorrow, in 2 hours, and make sure that you have that everyone who's in the, you know, inner circle is on the same page, that you have all of the facts of what occurred, that you have your own narrative and what you guys are going to present about the victim in the case, the issue in the case, have all of that in advance so that you know what you're going to the media for. You don't want to just go to the media and say something really bad happened. You want to make sure that you have all the pieces together when you present that. And also, once you start being contacted, you already have that together to present. Because, and this is going to sound flippant or weird, I don't have a better way to say it. For the most part, media can be lazy in a way. So you have to already have it put together. These are the facts. This is the day. This is the time. This is the call to action for the public that we're asking for. So it's already put together, because a journalist or, you know, a media outlet or a platform is not going to put that together for you. So if you have it already put together, it makes it that much easier to get it into the hands of media.
And I would just add that it's also a thing of knowing what you have. So for example, if you have video footage, do you have not necessarily I'm not talking about, you know, of shooting or anything like that, but let's just say it's a housing issue or, you know, there's all kinds of civil rights issues that could happen. Um, what kind of media, meaning photos, people who can speak to the issue, things like that, do you actually have? And that could also determine the best way to go about it. So, like, there's a way where you can influence the media to, you can attract them by, you know, posting on social media, just telling your story generally. But then the thing about the facts of the case is that the press generally has to verify whether or not the story is in fact true, right? Or that what is happening is not just your perspective. So they're going to want to know, was the police contacted? Are there police reports, or is there any documentation? If there's a discrimination issue, where's the documentation for that? What organizations were not necessarily organizations, government agencies that are involved? Like, they're going to want to know all of that stuff, because they themselves don't want to be in a situation where it's like, we promoted this thing, this idea, and then they come to find out there's all of this stuff in the background that was not actually true. So that's where the burden of proof for the news sometimes is a lot broader than just this is what happened. And what Morgan said earlier about feelings versus facts, that's another thing, is just having the facts laid out and ready, just because they're not advocates, right? They're not in a business of just promoting it just because, oh, this was an injustice. It is a story. It is a piece where they're trying to inform the world about what is happening about X thing. And that's about the extent of what their actual role is supposed to be. I also want to throw in there, because I think it was said somewhere, I think I was reading the chat, but it was said that you know, where the older the more traditional journalists, where have they gone? I know everybody has seen the shakeup with like Joyanne Reed and other people, but they have platforms now. They have their own platforms. I don't know if you guys have been following folks like Don Lemon or anybody who has left any of these major networks. They have 3 million followers, 4 million followers on all their social media platforms. They have their own blog. Some of them are starting Substacks. They have their own groups of people that follow them. And so they are still the media. So you can still reach out to them. And it's probably a little bit, I don't want to say easier, but it's a little bit, they have more freedom because they're starting their own journalism type environments in order to continue to do their jobs. They haven't left the profession in some ways, if that makes sense.
That actually kind of ties into one of the, oops, sorry, go ahead, Morgan.
I was going to say, just tying into what Rabia was just saying, in addition, I know something that I struggle with often with journalists and not having one beat. They're on multiple different beats. They're covering multiple different stories. And, you know, it may not be a Joy Reid, but it might be a local news team that you're trying to get in touch with. What I have found is if you can come to them with a really well packaged piece that you can explain very easily to them, that helps. It's very rare that I write a release and it's almost not completely verbatim in the story that they put out, or huge chunks are taken from the release and put straight into the story, right? So if you can write it really well for them, and then when you're speaking to them and say, here's why this matters to your audience, or I know that you've covered these last 3 stories, so I know this is important to you, it makes it a lot easier to get them to cover your pieces. And build that relationship with them. Now they know, okay, they've been paying attention to me. They know what's happening. They kind of know what my shtick is, whether or not it's a huge platform or a small one. There's still ways that you can get in touch with those people and get them to cover.
And one of the questions in the Q&A was, what suggestions do you all have for finding credible media sources on ongoing high-profile civil rights issues?
To follow or to put your particular issue out on? It would depend. I think that if you're trying to put a case out, I think that what Morgan and what Rabia said is important. You are packaging your message, so it needs to be credible. It needs to be well researched. It needs to be have all the facts and everyone be on the same page as we've been discussing. because you're creating what the narrative is going to be about the case. In terms of, I don't know if the question was who to look for to have credible information.
Kind of suggestions on finding credible media.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me personally, it's gonna sound very like weird, but I go to my own firm's page because we, every single day we put out our press releases on all our new cases. So sometimes other media outlets will be reporting and they won't take the information from the press release. And so there could be errors with the information. So I always check back honestly to what we've actually, our information that we put out a lot of times, because it's hard to know where to fact check. And if you're going directly to the attorneys or the legal team or the comms team that's assigned to the case, that's actually working on the case, then that's going to be the best information.
And I would just throw out there that again, I'm a huge proponent of following and looking to the advocacy orgs, the different ones that are doing different work. The reason why is because, as I said earlier at the top of the webinar, media is changing. And because of that, a lot of the smaller nonprofit spaces who are very issue specific based, they're putting out more content to kind of explain things and to kind of to give context that doesn't exist. So I would say, as anybody who is doing any legal work, you should be following the organizations that are actually in the weeds and know this stuff and be able to find, to be able to connect with them on all their social, because they'll give you facts all the time, right? Then the second thing is that there's certain folks, like for example, there's a Phil Lewis he's the deputy editor of the Huffington Post. But what's really cool about what he does is all of his social media, he's sharing all kinds of information coming from all sorts of outlets. So a lot of people follow him just to figure out what's happening in the news today. So it's finding those people who are giving, again, those facts, not so much commentary. He may give commentary here and there, but not really. So follow folks like that. It just really depends on, I hate to say it, there are very much niche groups, people who are doing different things, and you're gonna have to start to build a hodgepodge of that. I think people are getting smarter about how to get it out, considering the changing environment, but we're still not there yet. So for now, I would say follow those trusted sources that you use. So all those news people you loved before, they're all on social media, follow them again. And then also look to these like smaller influencers are more news-based, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much. I have one other question too that for the panelists. You talked earlier about kind of the disinformation, especially a lot on social media. It's really hard to get some of that disinformation off of social media. You're trying to report things, and especially now that they don't really do anything about anything anymore. Do you have any suggestions or tips about how to deal with handling disinformation that's out there about a particular case you're handling?
For me, one experience I had is that someone actually made an entire Tubi movie about Shinkwell's case that was not factual. And so we had to work on, communicating directly with their production team and communicating with the platform that the information was on to say, hey, this has got to be taken down. But that's why, even though I sound like a broken record, I'm saying, like, in the beginning, the most important thing is to get your strategy and to get your story together so that everyone is saying one thing, so that if there's only one thing being said, not one sentence, but I mean, there's one message, then it's harder for misinformation to get out because there's not things that are being interpreted and taken out of context. So that's why I keep repeating that. But when it happens, it is important we have, watchers on our team, a few people that their entire day is sitting on YouTube and basically they have Google prompts, and anytime anything comes up for Shanquella's case, they get in there and they will get in the chat personally and be like, hey, this is wrong, this is misinformation, this is actually what's done, here's a link to the actual letter that was sent to the White House, or here's the actual response, and stuff like that. So people who are saying, you know, what can I do? If you're that person, you can be that person on the team that's just managing, you know, if there is misinformation out, making sure, because a lot of times, certain correspondents or certain journalists will correct. If you say to them, or you DM them, or you message on the story, if it's online, and say, hey, this information is incorrect, this isn't, you know, actually what was said or what is happening, they will actually correct it, but someone has to communicate with them that there's an error in the messaging and show what the correct information is. So I think it helps to have someone that is watching for if there is a misinterpretation or if there is misinformation, to have it corrected. And also making sure that your team is sticking to what your actual messaging is.
Another question from our participants. This one's a little specific, but how can a victim break through in Florida with criminal cases that is difficult to be heard? And why do you think it is difficult for people to stand up for victims that have been failed by the legal system?
I can take that from, so a part of my background, I've worked for FAM Foundation, which is a national criminal justice group, and they focus on sentencing reform, and from the perspective of families who have been, people who have been incarcerated for decades for just different issues. When the easiest way I have seen through storytelling of getting your case elevated is literally to work with a national group, especially if the issue has passed. So for example, if it's not a current case, something that happened yesterday, a lot of times you're going to have to work with a legal group that is elevating a certain issue in order to get your issue heard more broadly. It's difficult. A lot of times it's difficult because there's just a lot of noise. Plain and simple. There are lots of victims. There are lots of people going through lots of things, and it's hard for the media and the public to sift through it all. So again, all of this stuff about preparing your package, your case, what is it about? What are the broader implications for anybody who is reading, watching this information and consuming it is going to be key to getting your voice heard. And it's not so much, I don't think it's difficult for people to stand up for victims. I think it's just so many issues all the time. And I think people have a hard time sifting through what can be elevated now versus what needs to be elevated later. And I know that's not comforting to hear, but it is something that you would have to do as a victim, in order to break through. It is partnering with those different organizations. It is preparing your press releases and everything else. It is just overall trying to even go into social media, telling your story that way. But there is a difference, I think, between a non-active case, so something that has been either litigated or whatever it may be, and something that is in the process of, because in the process of, media can follow it, right? They can see, they can go to the hearing, they can do all of these different things. But after the fact, there's a whole different avenue that has to be taken. That's my
I just wanted to say quickly, because I know we're running out of time. I actually worked on a nationally syndicated show called Wrong Man, where on the show we investigated cases of people who said that they were wrongfully convicted. We had 2 seasons, it was on Stars, but how the cases were selected was that we get tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of mail, as Rabia said, sifted through. Like literally, we cannot review the mail as much as it comes into the firm. And so one of the cases that what I want to say is not to give up on wanting your issue to be heard. And if you're sending letters, if you're sending communications, don't give up on that, because one of the cases that was in the very first season of Wrong Man on Stars was a case where the family had been writing letters to the director for multiple years, and he found one of the letters behind his dresser. And when he happened to be working on this project, he was like, you know what? I just found this letter. I'm going to reach out to this community organization. And that's how that particular case was involved in the docuseries. But not to give up, not to feel like, oh, well, you know, I sent a letter to NAACP, or I sent a letter to Sue Ann and Ben and they didn't respond to me, so I'm just gonna stop. Like, don't give up, because you don't know when the timing, as Rabia was saying, for your case or for that issue is going to be right for us to be able to actually put the resources around it to assist.
Great. We probably have time for maybe one more question, and we'll do some final thoughts. But this is an interesting one that I saw. That maybe you have suggestions. It's probably a longer question, but what is the template for a well-written press release? And maybe you can give some examples, or somewhere someone can go to get some examples of well-written press releases. Maybe there aren't any out there.
Oh, I can answer. I mean, the only answer I have in terms of press releases are on, I always go to Bankrupt Law has all of the every single press release on Instagram for every single case that's released, sometimes multiple times a day. So it shows you, you know, just it's a very basic format for every single press release. But I'm a writer and an advocate, so it's a little different how we have to do it, and we'll also work with actual comms and media people to get it there. But it's a good start in terms of the basic messaging of knowing you got to have the date, you got to have the location, you got to have what you want for your headline, and then your facts and your story.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Press releases, there is a basic template for different types of press releases, and then you put in your own information. I think the key is, when you're putting together a press release, is knowing how to make it newsworthy, right? Like, how the thought behind a press release is not like, oh, this happened. The thought is, how do I get a reporter interested in what we're saying or doing? So how does this, what's the story they would need to tell? Why do what their readers are, what is in that their readers are interested in, if that makes sense. So it's really thinking through strategically, what else can you tie it to? Because then we also follow up, and we did talk about this, we follow up press releases with pitches, right? So you you call them and say, hey, you got the press release, here's what was in it, and this is why you should care. So there's a whole thing that goes along with that. But it's the basic template of a press release that can be found practically anywhere, but the key is making it newsworthy, such that that reporter will pick it up and say, hey, I think this is something we should follow because the implications are this and that. And you have to tell them what those implications are. So, like, it's not like, oh, they should read and be like, oh, I get it. They're not going to get it. You need to tell them in the press release.
Great. So we have some time for some final thoughts and from our speakers that you would like to leave our participants with today. Who wants to start? Sue Ann?
I can, sure. I just wanted to reiterate that, you know, do what you can from wherever you are. This civil rights work is, and equal rights is the most important work of our time. And so it's so important that no one feel like, hey, there's nothing that I can do, I am too small, because all of us together are what will push this movement forward. And so wherever you are, if you're a teacher, you work in a restaurant, you're you know, in finance, whatever it is, do what you can from exactly where you are. If it's joining an organization, if it's helping someone that is in an organization to be able to work with their organization, if it's making a donation, even if it's something small, do whatever you can, because all those things together add up to progress in civil rights in this movement, which is the most important work of our time. So I appreciate everyone who joined the Civil Rights Boot Camp and who hung out with us today, because you're doing something, you're taking an affirmative step in the most important work of our time, and making sure that you're educated and you are working through this together. So it's the high honor of my life to do this work and to participate in this panel. So thank you for having me.
And I'll go. I would say, don't let any risk aversion be the reason why you don't reach out to press and the media. A lot of what we talked about today was about preparation and thinking through different avenues in which to promote your stories or to tell what's going on. Because of the change in media, there are more options than there ever have been before. And there's also opportunities for you to control the narrative in the way that you need to. But what I would love to see happen, especially in the legal community, is to let go a little bit of that, we're so afraid, and start to strategize about what's to go out, and then you will see some return on your investment, and you will see changes nationally, because that disinformation issue is a disinformation and misinformation issue is because we're not speaking up. It's because we're not saying enough, that people don't actually understand the issues that we understand and know so well. So my last parting thought literally is, don't let an aversion to press or being afraid of what can happen be the thing that stop you from working with the press. Strategize, figure out how to do it, and then go for it.
And I'll just leave with, I think something that's always important to me is strategy first, which we've talked about quite a bit, and then creativity. So making sure that you know what you want to get out there and then how you can get it out there creatively, because you do have to often break through the white noise. I think the other part that's really important in comms is cultivating relationships. It can be hard to get media to pay attention if they've never spoken to you ever before. And for a lot of us, it may be your first time having to reach out to them, but I think it's important to continue those relationships, to always be able to, just, hey, just checking in, are you still covering this, or whatever it might be, so that when you do need to come to them with something more, you have the relationship, but making sure that you come to them with something real, something that you make sure you have good information on, that you've packaged up, and that you can provide them resources or things they can put out. So keeping the lines of communication open have been really important for me in this journey.
Great. I know we're a little over, but really quickly, thank you everyone for joining the session. We'd like to express our gratitude to this esteemed group of panelists. What a lot of great information and insight you provided for us today. You are all doing such important work, and I want to thank you for taking your time out of your schedule for sharing your experiences with us today. The section of Civil Rights and Social Justice provides free webinars and resources for legal professions and advocates nationwide. We hope this helps you in your work. And again, if you can, please consider becoming an active member in the ABA. You may do so at americanbar.org/CRSJ. And don't go anywhere. We do have a short break, but we hope you will stay with us for our next panel, end of the day, and the last panel of the day, a call to action, where we go from here. It will start at 2:45 Eastern Time and is accessible from the event lobby. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and our panel